All right, here's our video today. A day on the moon, the Apollo 11 astronauts. And the thing is about a day on the moon, they spent 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon. But that's only 1/32nd of a moon day. So we'll clear that up. They didn't spend any night on the moon. So Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, the only two astronauts to land on Apollo 11 with the Apollo 11 rocket in the Eagle. So again, we'll write it up here, they spent 21 hours and about 36 minutes. That was their day on the moon. But again, the moon, a day on the moon, on the lunar surface, a day on the moon is about 30 days, 30 Earth days. It's actually 29.5 days. And that's day and night. So if we split it up into day and night, we'll say roughly around 14.7 is daylight. 14.7 days of daylight. Remember, there's no atmosphere on the moon. There's no clouds. There's no rain. So it's daylight with a black sky, of course, because there is no atmosphere. There's nothing for the light to bend, to reflect. So it's roughly 15 days of daylight and 15 days of night. So the Apollo 11 astronauts, when they were on the moon for 21 hours and 36 minutes, well, it's all in the daylight time. And like I said before, that would have been, we'll put it over here, 1/32nd of a day on the lunar surface. And there's reasons why they would have gone in the early part of the day of the moon, because the temperatures can be extremely hot and extremely cold on the moon. But we'll talk about temperature in this video also. And here's a picture which the astronauts did not see. This would have been nighttime on the moon, which they didn't have. They didn't experience the nighttime on the moon with this half Earth, half Terra in the distance. But this is what it would have been like. All right, and just to give a time period here, we'll keep yellow. So they left July 16th, and they got to the moon July 20th, but we'll do it by hours. So in the 100th hour, the Eagle would be the capsule that would land on the moon. It would undock from Columbia, and in Columbia, you had Michael Collins aboard Columbia. He never got to set foot on the moon. So the Eagle, which everyone refers to as the LM, the lunar module, it undocked in the 100th hour from Columbia. And Columbia again was the module that Michael Collins was on from Columbia. And around the 102nd hour, given rough estimates here, 102nd hour, the Eagle would have landed. So the first words that Armstrong would have said on the moon, technically, would have been when he was in the Eagle and the Eagle landed, not when he stepped on the moon. So there's two different quotes there. So the first words, let's write out the first words. The first words would have been Houston, the Eagle has landed. That would have been his first words. Actually, he said Houston, Tranquility Base, because they landed in the Sea of Tranquility. Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. That's really his first words. He's in the LM. He's in the Eagle, though, when he said that. So technically, the first words that a human said on the surface of the planet would have been Houston. That's the first word, Houston. But when he stepped on the planet, not the planet itself, but the moon, when he stepped on the surface of the moon, he would have said the famous words that everybody knows, right? So on the 112th hour, the Eagle landed. And by the 109th hour, that's when Armstrong was leaving the capsule. So they spent a few hours in the Eagle before they took off onto the surface. So we'll say when he said his famous quote, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Of course, the A, we never heard the A part, the audio of the A. So all you hear is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So in the 109th hour, which was about 2:56 UTC, I'll explain that in a minute. It's about 10:56 p.m. Eastern time in New York, in the East Coast, 10:56 p.m. Of course, if we do military time, that would have been 22:56. So UTC is Coordinated Universal Time. You'll hear about that. It's Coordinated Universal Time that many countries will use to be united in their times. So at 10:56 p.m., Armstrong does step on the moon with his famous quote. There has been many people wondering where he got the inspiration for that quote. Some people even said from The Hobbit, where there's a quote from that says, "Not a great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark." Of course, Armstrong denies any of that, but some people were thinking he may have got some of the lines from The Hobbit. So Aldrin, he steps on the moon, on the surface of the moon. Buzz Aldrin steps on the moon about 20 minutes later, and he's going to plant a flag on the moon about 12:18 a.m. New York time. But the first thing he's going to do, and with the help of Armstrong, is they're going to turn on this instrument that's still working, by the way, on the moon. It's called the Early Apollo Scientific Experiments Package. And they just abbreviate it. And we're going to talk more about it because we're going to see a chart just to show the temperature and elevation of the sun when they were on the moon. Okay, so this right over here, we can't even see it. It's called the Early Apollo. I'll show you a picture of this. The Early Apollo Scientific Experiments Package. They have these interesting names. See if we can fit it. Yeah, there we go. So it's the EASEP. And we have data from this device that's still working. And we have a picture of Buzz Aldrin turning it on. And that would have probably been turned on maybe around 11:16 p.m. Around that time. Something around that time. Let's get a picture of that. And there's the eagle in the background with Aldrin turning on the Early Apollo Scientific Experiments Package. And then we'll look at some data on it. And make sure our pen's working over here. So remember, a daylight on the moon can last 14 and a half or more Earth days on the moon. So we can see it here. He's turning on the packet right over here. Here he is, right over here. You can see that the temperature in Kelvin is close to 280 in Kelvin. If we look way over here, it's not that bad out when they're there. It's around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Not that bad. See the elevation of the sun, if we say, put a line straight down, it's about over here. So maybe it's 15 degrees. So on Earth that would be early morning. But so it's early morning on the moon, and about over here, 90 degrees. This is when the sun's high in the sky. So we can call this noon, but in actuality, this would have been probably 7.5 days. 7.5 days on the moon. And as you can see, the temperature at noon at that time, if we go over here, it's closing in about 160 degrees. Now, Armstrong said that the temperature on the moon was about 200 degrees, so it's a little off there. So when he was on the moon, because he would have been off the moon by this time, remember, they only spent 21 hours, a little over 21 hours on the moon. So they spent their time on the moon would have been right over here in this time frame. So the highest temperature they probably received, according to this data, if we move it over here, it was probably very comfortable. It was very comfortable on the moon. Now, if they stayed longer, it would have been getting hotter and hotter for them. So let's keep that date up for a minute. And if we go over here, you can see there's data missing over here because, of course, we're now going into night. So you see over here we have from here is about August 3rd and doesn't turn back on again to August 19th. Roughly around that time. Maybe it's a little more than that. Probably turns off maybe August 4th or 5th, around that time, which corresponds to roughly 14 days, 14 extra days there. So again, a day on the moon is 30 days. So half the time, half day, 14 days, roughly 15 days, and night, 15 days. And then again, daytime again. You can see the temperature rising the next day in August, but they were long gone by then. They were long gone before it got to noon. So briefly, some of the things we should say again: 10:15, 6 p.m. on July 20th, Armstrong is on the moon. By 12:18 a.m., July 21st, Aldrin is planting the flag. By the way, would fall down when the Eagle took off. The thrust from the Eagle would knock it down. And Aldrin would stay on the moon about another hour and 33 minutes on the surface before returning to Eagle. And Armstrong would stay another 44 minutes after Aldrin got back into the capsule, and then they both took off. And again, this data you're seeing from the EASEP, the early Apollo scientific experiments package, it was also testing solar wind and lunar dust. It was testing for any moonquakes, and of course, as you're seeing here, temperature and elevation of the sun. Now, about temperature on the moon, let's talk about that for a minute. So when we're talking about, and here's our picture of the lunar surface. So when we're talking about the temperature on Earth, we measure the temperature of the air, but there is no air on the moon. There is no atmosphere on the moon. So those footsteps, everything that was left behind on the moon is perfectly preserved on the moon. The first footsteps of Aldrin and Armstrong and all the other astronauts that followed are still there perfectly. And the flag that has fallen down is still there. So we're not measuring the air, we're measuring the surface of the moon. The sun's rays penetrate the surface and quickly it will go into space. But so you can have different gradients of temperature as we've seen from the data. Let's look at the data one more time. And by the way, here's Aldrin, picture of Aldrin with the flag that he took around 12:18 a.m. on July 21st. And you see all those footprints there. Those footprints are still there because there's no atmosphere on the moon. All right, and let's get our pen again. Maybe we'll use green this time. So here's the 90-degree mark, elevation of the sun. So we know that this mark, we follow it, this would have been roughly noon. Again, we can't use hours on the moon because 14 days is the daylight. Over 14 days is the daylight, as we can see from there. So if we say that they came in the morning, this is their block right over here. They came in the morning for a better temperature. Obviously, you can see the temperature. We just put a dotted line straight across with the Fahrenheit. We're looking at around 60 degrees, maybe a little more. All right, and then after 21 hours and 33 minutes, 36 minutes on the moon, after spending about an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours collecting samples, they went back into the Eagle, and finally they would take off and they would rendezvous with the Columbia where Collins was waiting for them, and they returned home. So that's our video today.